The teenager leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk cutting across his face, as if the courtroom were just another comment section he could dominate. When he spoke, his voice carried no hesitation, no fear, only swagger. "I own this road," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room froze. A few heads turned. Someone in the gallery let out a quiet breath they didn't realize they were holding. This wasn't just a speeding ticket anymore. In that single sentence, the case transformed. It stopped being about miles per hour and became a declaration of entitlement. A belief that rules were optional, that confidence could outrun consequence. The teen wasn't apologizing. He wasn't explaining. He was performing. To him, authority was something to challenge, not respect. The law was just another obstacle standing between him and the thrill of being untouchable. The irony hung thick in the air. Roads are built for everyone. Parents driving home from night shifts, immigrants taking early morning buses to work, children buckled in the back seats trusting adults they'll never meet. Yet here stood a young man claiming ownership over something meant to be shared. The tension wasn't loud, but it was electric, pulsing through the courtroom like a warning. Cameras weren't rolling, but every instinct in the room sensed it's a moment about to detonate on screen. What the teen didn't realize was that the man listening had spent a lifetime dealing with people exactly like him. Asterisk on paper. This was a routine traffic case, the kind that usually ends with a fine and a shrug. But moments like this don't live on paper. They live in culture. They live in the space where bravado meets consequence, where a generation raised on engines, algorithms, and applause learns what limits actually mean. The teenager in front of the bench wasn't just defending a speedometer reading. He was defending an identity. Tar culture today isn't only about horsepower. It's about visibility. Fast cars become fast content. Clips get likes. Defiance becomes a brand. The louder the confidence, the more attention it earns. Somewhere along the way, the message shifts from freedom to dominance, from skill to entitlement. Roads turn into stages. Rules turn into suggestions, and accountability becomes something that happens to other people. This is where privilege quietly enters the room. Not always wealth, not always money, but the privilege of assuming forgiveness. The belief that consequences are negotiable if you speak boldly enough. That authority will bend if challenged publicly. For many watching, especially those who grew up learning to stay quiet, to follow rules just to survive, that assumption cuts deep. Because they know rules are rarely optional for everyone. For immigrant families, working-class drivers, and people taught early that mistakes carry permanent weight, this scene lands differently. They see not rebellion, but risk. They hear not confidence, but disregard for lives moving alongside him. Every near miss on asphalt echoes with memories of rules followed out of necessity, not choice. This contrast fuels the anger, the hope, and the attention. Because when someone claims ownership of shared space, everyone else feels erased. And suddenly, a small courtroom feels like a national stage, waiting to see whether the system bends to noise or stands. Firm with consequences, finally demanding recognition from everyone watching in silence together. The courtroom, in that moment, becomes more than a building. It becomes a mirror. On one side stands ego, inflated by attention and insulated by youth. On the other stands responsibility, boring to some, sacred to others. This is the collision playing out across classrooms, streets, and screens everywhere. Who gets to test limits? Who pays the price when things go wrong? That's why this moment matters. Because it asks a question bigger than speed. It asks whether confidence without care is courage or chaos. Whether owning a loud voice means owning shared spaces. Whether society rewards restraint or celebrates recklessness. The answer wouldn't come from shouting. It would come from silence, patience, and someone who understood. That power doesn't need to prove itself, and standing at the center of this storm was a judge who had heard every excuse imaginable. The teenager didn't wake up one morning and decide to disrespect a courtroom. This attitude had been built slowly, reinforced every day by screens, cheers, and a circle that never said no. Behind the smirk was a young man raised in a world where attention equals value and confidence is mistaken for truth. Online, speed wasn't dangerous. It was impressive. Risk wasn't reckless. It was content. Every rev of the engine promised admiration. Every rule broken became proof of fur lessons. His friends fed that belief relentlessly. They filmed from passenger seats, laughed at near misses, turned moments of danger into clips designed for applause. In that world, nothing bad ever happened, because nothing ever lingered long enough to feel real. Consequences were edited out. Mistakes were deleted. Validation arrived instantly, training him to believe that boldness alone could bend reality. When people cheered long enough, it started to feel like ownership. He spoke about freedom constantly, yet his version was narrow and hollow. Freedom meant doing what he wanted, when he wanted, without interruption. It never included the responsibility that makes freedom sustainable. He bragged about independence while depending on roads he didn't build, laws he didn't create, and systems he barely acknowledged. That contradiction never registered, because the world he knew rarely forced him to sit with it. In his mind, authority was something to outgrow, not respect. Adults were obstacles. Rules were written by people who didn't understand him. Confidence became armor, shielding him from doubt, from empathy, from the idea that someone else's life could intersect with his choices at 80 miles per hour. When people warned him, he heard jealousy. When tickets came, he saw inconveniences. Accountability felt abstract, distant, theoretical. What made him dangerous wasn't cruelty, but certainty. The certainty that nothing truly bad would happen. The certainty that charm could replace responsibility. The certainty that consequences were flexible, especially for someone young, loud, and unafraid. That certainty followed him into the courtroom, riding shotgun with his ego, whispering that this would be another story he could tell later for laughs. Yet beneath the bravado lived something fragile. A fear of being ordinary. A fear of silence. A fear that without motion, noise, and attention, there might be nothing special left to hold on to. So he doubled down. Louder words, stronger posture, bigger claims. I own this road wasn't just arrogance. It was insecurity wrapped in volume. He believed power came from taking space. He believed respect was something seized, not earned. And for a long time, the world around him had allowed that illusion to survive unchallenged. But illusions don't last forever, especially not when they finally meet someone who understands power differently. Someone who has seen entitlement crumble, confidence collapse, and youth learn its hardest lessons. But across the bench sat someone whose life had been shaped by rules, not broken by them. Judge Caprio did not arrive at the bench by accident or entitlement. His authority was not inherited, borrowed, or inflated by applause. It was earned slowly through years that demanded patience long before they offered respect. He grew up in a household shaped by immigrant sacrifice, where rules were not symbols of control, but lifelines for survival. In that world, dignity was quiet. Work was constant. Excuses were luxuries nobody could afford as a young man. He learned early that the system did not bend easily for people like his family. Every opportunity came with conditions. Every mistake carried weight. That reality didn't harden him into bitterness. It refined him. It taught him that fairness mattered most when power was uneven, and that justice only meant something if it was applied without noise or ego. Decades of public service followed. Not glamorous, not viral, but steady. Judge Caprio saw the same faces cycle through the courtroom again and again. He heard desperation disguised as anger, arrogance, masking fear, and regret that arrived too late. Over time, patterns became clear. People don't break rules because they feel strong. They break them because they feel invisible, rushed, or untouchable. His role was never to perform outrage. It was to slow the moment down until truth could breathe. What set him apart was restraint. Where others raised their voices, he lowered his. Where confrontation tempted spectacle, he chose clarity. He understood something many never learn. Real authority does not rush. It listens. It waits. It allows people to reveal themselves fully before responding. Silence in his courtroom was not weakness. It was gravity for immigrant families watching. His presence carried meaning beyond the robe. He represented proof that contribution matters, that service earns trust, and that power can be exercised without humiliation. He knew what it meant to follow rules not because they were convenient, but because breaking them was never an option. That knowledge shaped every decision he made, especially with young people standing at the edge between consequence and correction. Judge Caprio believed accountability could coexist with compassion. That discipline did not require cruelty. That lessons delivered with dignity lasted longer than punishments delivered with force. He had seen lives change not through fear, but through moments of recognition, and someone realized they were being taken seriously for the first time. In contrast to the teenager's performance, the judge needed no audience. His confidence came from repetition, from decades of decisions made when nobody was watching. He had nothing to prove, no brand to defend, no ego to protect. His power lived in consistency, in the certainty that rules exist to protect shared spaces, not dominate them. That calm was deliberate. It was built on memory, on sacrifice, on a lifetime of understanding how quickly arrogance collapses when met with reality. He had watched bravado dissolve into humility more times than he could count. He knew how this story usually ended, even if the young man in front of him did not. He had learned that young defiance often hid confusion, and that humiliation only hardened it. His approach was measured, shaped by the belief that a moment of truth could redirect a life. Not every lesson required punishment. Some required recognition. In his courtroom, fairness was not softness. It was strength refined by experience. He believed the law should teach, not just strike, and that respect earned freely carried more weight than obedience forced through fear. This philosophy, built over decades, prepared him for encounters exactly like this one. Moments when bravado entered loud and left quieter, carrying something heavier than pride. The weight of his silence pressed against the room, reminding everyone that experience does not shout, it waits. And waiting can be the loudest answer. When the teen finally spoke again, the courtroom braced for impact. The teen leaned forward now, confidence sharpening instead of softening. He spoke faster, louder, as if volume could tilt the scales. He shrugged when asked about speed, waved off concern about others on the road, framed everything as exaggeration. To him, this was still a performance, and he was determined to win it. Each answer carried an edge, a challenge, a dare for authority to blink first. Judge Caprio did not blink. He asked questions slowly, deliberately, stripping away the noise. How fast were you going? How many lanes? What time of day? Simple words, placed carefully, forcing the teen to confront facts instead of feelings. The contrast grew uncomfortable. One voice filled the room. The other barely rose above it, yet somehow carried more weight. The teen laughed once. Short sound meant to signal confidence, but it landed flat. He spoke about skill, about control, about knowing his car better than anyone else. He insisted no one was hurt, as if danger only counted after damage was done. Each claim widened the distance between intention and impact. Between what he believed and what everyone else understood, Judge Caprio listened without interruption. That patience unsettled the teen more than anger ever could. Silence stretched between questions, long enough for words to echo back at their speaker. With every pause, the courtroom shifted. The audience leaned in. The bravado that once seemed powerful began to feel exposed, repetitive, rehearsed. The imbalance became impossible to ignore. One man chased dominance through assertion. The other allowed truth to surface on its own. The teen's posture stiffened. His tone sharpened. Defensiveness crept into his certainty. He was no longer performing for friends or followers. He was responding to a system that did not reward noise. Judge Caprio's questions narrowed, each one quietly closing an exit. Responsibility hovered closer. The teen tried to outrun it with words, but the space was shrinking. For the first time, consequences felt present, not theoretical. The courtroom air grew heavy. charged with the realization that confidence alone was no longer enough. The teen sensed the shift, but resisted it, clinging to bravado like a life raft. His answers tightened, explanations looping back on themselves. What once sounded bold now felt brittle. Each second stretched longer than the last, and the room noticed. This was the moment when momentum quietly changed sides, when performance lost its audience, and reality reclaimed the floor. It marked the instant before reckoning, suspended between denial and consequence. Where silence begins teaching lessons, noise never could. For everyone watching, something irreversible had already begun, and it was unmistakable to all. Then Judge Caprio paused. Long enough for the confidence in the room to start cracking, Judge Caprio finally spoke. And when he did, his voice did not rise. It lowered. The room leaned toward it instinctively. He repeated the teen's words slowly, not mocking, not angry, just clear. You said you own the road. He let the sentence sit between them, heavy and unescapable. Then he asked a question so simple it disarmed the entire performance. Tell me how you own it. The teen opened his mouth, then stopped. The smirk faded, replaced by confusion. Judge Caprio continued, still calm, still measured. He explained that roads are built by taxpayers, maintained by workers who wake before sunrise, and shared by people who trust strangers every time they turn a key. He spoke of parents driving tired children home, nurses rushing between shifts, immigrants commuting quietly, following rules not for applause but for safety. Those people, he said gently, they own this road too. The courtroom shifted. Heads nodded. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge reframed the moment without accusation, turning arrogance into a lesson. He explained that freedom on the road exists because everyone agrees to limits. That speed becomes danger not because of skill, but because unpredictability multiplies risk. He did not lecture. He revealed. Each sentence stripped away illusion, placing it with responsibility. The teen tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand, not sharply, but enough. Listen, he said, firm now. Listening is part of learning. Silence returned, thicker than before. Judge Caprio spoke about youth, about how confidence often arrives before wisdom, and how society pays the price when ego outruns empathy. He made it clear this was not about humiliation. It was about reality. Owning something, he said, means protecting it, not endangering it. The teen's posture changed. Shoulders dropped, eyes lowered. For the first time, the courtroom saw him not as loud, but young. Judge Caprio acknowledged that youth directly. He said mistakes happen, but arrogance turns mistakes into habits. He asked the teen to imagine explaining a crash to a family who never made it home. The question landed without drama, devastating in its simplicity. Gasps followed. Someone wiped their eyes. The judge continued, explaining that skill behind the wheel does not cancel responsibility to others. That courage is not shown by speed, but by restraint. He spoke of dignity, not as something demanded, but demonstrated. The words weren't aimed to punish. They were aimed to pierce. The teen nodded slowly now, the fight drained from his voice. When he spoke again, it was quieter, uncertain. Judge Caprio listened fully. Then he explained the ruling, tying consequence to understanding, not vengeance. He made it clear the lesson would stay longer than the penalty. Remember this moment, he said, because the road remembers everyone who uses it. The room was silent. The power of the moment did not come from volume, but from clarity. Confidence had been replaced with humility. Performance with reflection. What began as entitlement ended as recognition. The teen no longer owned the road. He finally understood he shared it. But the real shockwave didn't stop at the courtroom doors by nightfall. The courtroom was no longer contained by walls. A single clip escaped into the digital bloodstream, and the reaction was immediate. Millions of screens replayed the same calm voice, the same dismantling of arrogance without anger. Comments poured in faster than anyone could track them. Parents thanked the judge for saying what they wished they could say to their own children. Immigrants shared the video with captions about respect, rules, and survival. Everyday drivers called it the moment. Someone finally spoke for them. The praise carried a particular weight from those who rarely feel seen. People who grew up learning that one mistake could change everything watched a young man meet accountability without cruelty. They saw dignity modeled, not demanded. Many wrote that they recognized the judge's tone instantly. The tone of someone who understands what it means to follow rules because you must, not because you want to. For them, the moment felt like validation long overdue. Hashtags formed around responsibility, humility, and shared space. Short clips were stitched with reactions, nods, tears, quiet smiles. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Parents sent it in family group chats. Some called it old-fashioned. Others called it necessary. The clip became a reference point, a reminder that authority doesn't need to humiliate to be effective. But not everyone applauded. Backlash followed, loud and predictable. Some accused the judge of overstepping, of lecturing, of turning a traffic case into a sermon. Others defended the teen, framing him as bold, misunderstood, punished for confidence. The comment section split into familiar lines: discipline versus freedom, empathy versus indulgence. Yet even the criticism proved the moment's reach. Nobody ignored it. Debate spilled beyond the clip. Podcasts dissected it. Influencers weighed in. Some tried to reframe the story as generational conflict. Others called it a lesson lost on a culture addicted to speed. Still, the image that lingered wasn't the argument. It was the silence, the pause, the way confidence collapsed without being attacked. What made the moment stick was its restraint. In an era where outrage travels faster than thought, this encounter moved in the opposite direction. It slowed people down. It asked viewers to sit with discomfort, to consider who pays the price when ego dominates shared spaces. That question resonated across backgrounds, across politics, across feeds. The teen faded from focus quickly. The judge did not. His words echoed because they applied everywhere. Roads, schools, workplaces, communities. Anywhere rules exist to protect more than one person at a time. The internet amplified what the courtroom had already decided. This wasn't about winning. It was about remembering how to live together. As the noise eventually softened, something remained beneath it. A shared recognition that accountability delivered with dignity travels further than punishment delivered with force. The viral moment became a quiet benchmark, replayed not for spectacle, but for reassurance. Proof that calm can still cut through chaos. And that authority grounded in fairness still matters. And in the quiet after the noise, one lesson remained impossible to ignore: the courtroom moment. Amplified across screens, distilled into a simple, universal truth: freedom without responsibility is chaos. The teen's arrogance, once loud and consuming, faded under the weight of reality, leaving a lesson that transcended speed limits or traffic laws. Dignity.com. And careful judgment endured where bluster and bravado collapsed. Judge Caprio's words traveled beyond the individual, touching communities that understood the cost of entitlement. They reminded viewers that accountability is not punishment, is recognition of shared responsibility, respect for others, and the courage to act with restraint. Humility is not weakness. It is strength exercised quietly, consistently, without needing applause. The road, like society itself, belongs to everyone who navigates it thoughtfully. This moral reckoning extends to every space. Where rules exist to protect collective well-being, it affirms that those who wield power with patience and fairness leave a lasting impact. Far beyond the moment of confrontation, arrogance may dominate a room briefly, but it cannot outlast the weight of integrity. In the echo of calm authority, communities find clarity, reflection, and inspiration. Which brings us back to the words that started it all. The teen once claimed, "I own this road," but the lesson was larger than one speeding moment. Judge Caprio reminded everyone that respect, responsibility, and dignity define true authority. Share this story. Reflect on accountability in your own life. Support a world where entitlement does not overshadow empathy, where courage is measured by restraint, and where every action considers the shared spaces we all inhabit. Be part of a community that values fairness, wisdom, and integrity, because standing for what's right matters far beyond the courtroom walls.